right. So we're talking today about active listening. And by that, we don't mean the kind of active listening I used to hear in the corporate world, which was you have to listen to them sufficiently so you can feed back some of what they said, and then you can go on to what you have to say because you were just sort of getting through it. This is different. This is about listening with the ears of the heart. So our theme this month is celebrating diversity, and we're living our spiritual values. And so listening is a spiritual practice. Listening is a spiritual value. But it's amazing how we can misinterpret what we hear. I don't know if you've ever heard the term mondegreen. It comes from a writer by the name of Sylvia Wright. When she was a child, she heard a song called The Bonnie Earl of Murray. It was a Scottish ballad, and it went, "Ye highlands and ye lowlands, oh where have ye been? Ye hae slay the Earl of Murray and Lady Montegreen." She found out years later it wasn't Lady Montegreen, which she thought was very romantic, that the lady and her lord would both be slain. That's romantic somehow. But anyway, but what she found out that it was actually, they slay the Earl of Murray and lay him on the green. And so she created this word called mondegreen, which is now in the dictionary, and it means, a misinterpretation of a song lyric. So for instance, Jimi Hendrix in Purple Haze says, excuse me while I kiss the sky. That was heard by a lot of people, excuse me while I kiss this guy. Yes, a lot of people heard that. And my friend Winona, when she was a girl, she heard this song, and the song said, I have mixed emotions over you. But what she heard was, I have missed emotions over you. I have missed and she couldn't figure out what those missed emotions were, but everything was a mystery at that moment in time, so missed emotions. And of course, who could forget the immortal Pat Benatar, hit me with your pet shark. But we listen, but sometimes we don't hear. We do not hear. A lot of what we hear depends on how focused we are, and we also have a lot of filters on our perceptions based on our beliefs and based on previous experiences that we've had. So in our book for this month, which is called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about, and by the way, the University of Houston has a whole list of these mondegreens that are pretty hilarious. I was in tears last night reading some of them. But in this book, he talks about a woman by the name of Abby Conant. And she tried out in a blind audition. That means there's a screen so the people who are judging cannot see who's playing. And she was trying out for a trombone player with the Munich Philharmonic. Well, she played her tune. I'm breathing heavily here. Yeah. I'm taped. Hang on a second. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, I think that's a little better. Anyway, so she does this blind audition, and they have 17 people lined up for auditions. They hear her, and they're like, we don't need to hear anybody else. That's who we want. And then she steps out on the stage, and they all look at her and say, oh, it's a woman. So they made her go through 2 more auditions, both of which she aced. Everybody who did the blind audition said, that's the one. So she got the job, but a year later, she got demoted to second trombone. She was first trombone. They demoted her to second trombone with no reason. And then she was on probation for a year. And then they said, we really need a man in the trombone section. She sued them, and they said, she's not strong enough to play the trombone as first trombone. So she went to the doctor and had, blood tests, lung tests, heart tests. And they said she was like an athlete. She was in great shape. She could do this job. So she won. She got the job back. She was reinstated. But it took her another 5 years to get equal pay to the men she was sitting next to. So the thing it is, when they listened, only listened, they knew she was the one. But their perception of her when she stepped out and it was a woman was a whole different thing. Because we don't believe what we hear. Our vision clouds what we're hearing. And they said this happens a lot because when they didn't have blind auditions, if you slouched while you played, they would, cross. If you had a good posture and you looked good, they could sort of overlook that you didn't sound that great. So now with blind auditions, the number of women in symphony orchestras has increased 5-fold. In fact, now about half of the people playing in symphony orchestras are women because they have blind auditions. There was another woman who was playing for the Met, and she was playing French horn, which is also, takes a lot of energy and breath and all that kind of stuff. And she was in a blind audition, and she won it, and she knew she'd won it because she played this last note and really extended it very long. In fact, she could hear the judges laughing because they thought it was a really macho thing to do, to last that long. Then she came out as the winner of the audition, and they were floored, not only because she was a woman, but because they knew her, because she had been a substitute French horn several times in other areas of the Met. And they hadn't realized how well she played because they didn't listen to her because she was a woman. Now, Malcolm Gladwell says, maybe we could apply this solution to court, where maybe we could not have the defendant sitting there. We would have them in another room and they could type out their answers on a computer, or somebody could intervene for them so that their appearance would not interfere with the judgment that was being made. The people wouldn't look at that person and say, oh, they look guilty, because we seem to have a lot more black people in prison than white people. And that may be because we have a prejudice, a bias, we may not even know that we have it, that we're thinking, that guy looks scary, he must be guilty. And he looks scary because he doesn't look like me. So he's just saying, maybe there are some other solutions we can pursue, because he says, they could have tried to have an affirmative action program at the symphonies and all that kind of stuff, but that wouldn't have worked like a blind audition works. Because there's no arguing with a blind audition. You just go for what you hear. You don't have the vision and your perceptions of your experience and your culture and everything else changing what you hear. You're just listening. I saw a post on Facebook yesterday and was talking about civil discourse. It was a bunch of people who were going to be part of a I think they were going to be part of a town hall meeting, and they were getting coached before they went. And they were told, first of all, listen with curiosity. Number 2, speak truthfully from the heart. Number 3, avoid stereotypes, name-calling, and personal attacks. And stay on topic. Address only the issue that you came to discuss. And assume others have good intentions. Assume others have good intentions. Yelling at each other does not make for good listening. My friend Janet came from an Italian family that yelled a lot. It used to scare me because in my family, if you yelled, there was some serious stuff going on. But I would go over to their house and they'd be yelling and screaming. And I remember one time her mother was in the living room and she and her husband were yelling back and forth at each other. And then she ran into the kitchen and she went like this, like she was having a great time. And then she went back out. That was totally outside of my experience. And so when my friend got married, of course, she yelled a lot because that's what they did in her family. But she found out if she wanted her husband to hear her, she whispered. Then he would listen. If she yelled, he was tuning her out. But if she whispered, he would listen. St. Benedict, the monastery, the monastic order of St. Benedict, has a practice called listening with the ears of the heart. And there's a wonderful article online by Bishop Frank Griswold of the Episcopal Church talking about this, because he says the heart is not simply a physical organ or seat of emotions. It is the core and center of our personhood as well. According to Jewish tradition, the heart is the throne of glory, which is the place where the Shekinah, the presence of God, most deeply is to be found. Therefore, when Paul, in his letter to the Romans, speaks of the love of God being poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us, he is speaking of God's reality breaking through to the inmost chamber of our own reality. We experience it then as a unified and transfiguring and transforming love. He says, this suggests to me that there is a deep interior word, the word of the Spirit, that is seeking to express itself over time. Sometimes we cannot hear because of our own anxieties, our own self-distancing, our own unwillingness to welcome the word as it really is to be found within us. So all of us are fairly comfortable with some form of prayer. It may not be spiritual mind treatment. It may be, a prayer that you learned in childhood. It may be just whatever you do to speak to the infinite. You have your prayer. That's speaking, but how about listening? Ernest Holmes says that we have there can be no real communication without a reciprocity of ideas. So we speak to God, but then we have to listen to allow God to speak to us. We call that listening meditation. But meditation doesn't mean that you have to sit in a lotus position and have a candle and incense and all of that stuff. It does mean that you let go of the day-to-day thoughts and are willing to be in a place of silence or in a place of absorption that allows something new to be perceived, something other to be known and recognized. It can come to us in so many ways. if we're available, if we're open. If we spend a minute every hour just stopping and taking a breath. If we spend 5 minutes in the morning just staring out the window, not thinking about anything, letting our thoughts float by, not getting involved in the thought, just breathing and letting the thoughts float away. We are making ourselves available for something else to come through. Bishop Griswold said, some years ago I was rushing for a train after giving a talk to a group of clergy on the need for solitude and space in our lives. And he was giving this on his day off. Hello. I took a flying leap onto the station platform and ruptured my Achilles tendon. It was a week before Lent began. That afternoon, I lay in a hospital bed awaiting surgery. Various clergy came to call, and I have to say that clergy can be terrible at visiting clergy in the hospital. All I heard were comments like, "So Frank, what in the hell have you done to get out of Lent this year?" Finally, a layperson came and asked how I was. Did I need anything? Being a good Episcopalian, I said I wanted a book of common prayer. Soon she reappeared with one, and I proceeded to read the evening prayer for that particular Tuesday. As I read the appointed psalm, I came across the verse, "As often as I said, my foot has slipped, oh, your love, O Lord, upheld me." That became the Word of God, or rather unleashed the Word of God to me right then and there. I burst out laughing. The circumstances of my life, the scriptural word and the word within me, all came together. What could have been a dreadful season became one of profound grace because of the orienting word that I received in the context of the evening prayer that afternoon. So we can get these messages from so many directions, so many ways that if we're open, the information that we need, the guidance that we need is absolutely available to us. That's why it's nice to have books like, magazines like The Science of Mind, that, you pick up the article or you pick up that daily guide and it says, boom, just what you needed to hear that day. Or maybe you have, a book of positive quotations, or you have a poetry book that you love, and you just open it, and boom, that poem that day tells you just what you need to know. That's why I love, Rumi and Hafiz. They have wonderful, wonderful, short, pithy poems that absolutely can straighten you out right away. Like the one that says, God and I are like two fat people in a tiny boat. We keep bumping into each other and laughing. It says, don't take it all so seriously. I think it was Goethe who said, angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. So it's about being open, being able to listen. Dr. Ken Gordon, who's the head of the Centers for Spiritual Living, was talking about what listening with the heart means to him, and it was that it means listening without judgment. It means hearing clearly without imposing our own opinions on the motives or whatever that the other person has. It means acting, as he said, from our sacred heart, from that heart that Griswold was talking about, that center of God consciousness right where we are. And it means speaking what we believe without anger or judgment. And that's a critical one. Speaking our truth without anger or judgment, just standing in it. A lot of people talk about speaking truth to power, but there's nothing so powerful as speaking truth from power. And speaking truth from power comes from standing in the realization of the God presence that's right here and the God presence that's right there in that person too, and talking from God to God. We are all on a sacred journey. We're all moving forward in our skills, becoming more and more skilled at listening, at realizing the presence of God. Griswold also said, in the scriptural tradition, word is not only spoken, it happens. It takes place, and thereby becomes part of our experience. We live the word as well as hear the word. Jesus said many times in Matthew, let him who has ears hear. I think he was saying, listen up. That was the way they did it back in those days. Listen up. And the thing is, I want you to remember that. Listen up. Listen for the greater truth. Listen for the reality with a capital R that wants to be seen, to be known, and to be expressed through us. Our wonderful founder, Ernest Holmes, says, the universe holds nothing against us. No matter how many mistakes we have made, we're still perfect beings within. And the within may become the without if we will carefully train ourselves to listen to the inner voice of truth, which speaks to us in our moments of quietness and solitude. So we make that space for quietness and solitude, and we put up the screen in front of the personalities and the judgments, and we just listen to the words. And we see if there is truth there. We listen from the heart and see if there's something to be learned, something to be known. I was listening to Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and they had Neil deGrasse Tyson on, that wonderful astrophysicist. And they ask stupid questions about cosmetology instead of cosmology. And so he gets one right and two wrong. And they said, wow, you got two wrong. And he said, I learned two new things. He said, I don't kick myself when I get something wrong because I always learn something. So when we get something wrong, we learn something. And that's what we're here to do, is continually learn something. And remember that we fail forward. We're failing forward. That's how we learn to walk. We learn to fall forward and catch ourselves, and fall forward and catch ourselves, and fall forward and catch ourselves. That's how walking works. So that's what we're doing in this life. And we're open to realizing that what we all need is a good listening to, not a good talking to. We all need a good listening to. It's a healing practice, and we can all practice it. But we listen first to that voice of our own intuition and that own inner guidance that is the expression of God within us. So let's do our affirmation for today, which is, I listen and trust the voice of my intuition. I listen and trust the voice of my intuition. I listen and trust the voice of my intuition. I listen and trust the voice of my intuition. And so it is.